In this movie, we'll take a look at the new Gradients panel. So unlike the Swatches panel, which is improved, Gradients is entirely new. And in fact, Photoshop 2020 offers 3 new panels: Gradients, Patterns, and Shapes. To get to the Gradients panel, you want to go up to the window menu and choose the Gradients command. And notice that unlike in the old days, where our default swatches were things that none of us would use on a regular basis, such as violet, orange, or spectrum, we now have folders upon folders of very useful gradients. I'm going to go ahead and twirl open purples, and I say twirl because I'm clicking on this twirly triangle right here, and notice all the gradients that we have, and these are all defaults, by the way. But let's say you want to create your own custom gradients, and you want to organize them into a group. Then start by clicking on the little folder icon at the bottom of the Gradients panel, and I'll just go ahead and call this guy My Grads, and then I'll click OK. And notice that it's twirled open, but it is empty, of course. And now to add a gradient to it, I'll click on a little plus sign at the bottom of the Gradients panel. And you can lift a gradient, by the way, as a starting point. So I'll go ahead and twirl open purple once again, and I'll grab this guy right here. Doesn't really matter, purple 21. And I'll go ahead and double click on this final color swatch in order to adjust it. And so I'll change the hue value to 270 degrees, and I might go ahead and crank up the brightness value to 77%, let's say, and click OK. And then I'll double click on this color swatch right here, and I'll just change it to white. So it's really up to you what kind of changes you make. Now, the thing you don't want to do is just click OK. Instead, you want to go ahead and name your gradient, and I'll call mine white to purple, let's say, and then you want to click on the new button. Now, whichever folder is active is where this gradient is going to go. So if I click new right now, it'll be added to the purples folder. If instead I want to add it to the My Grads folder, then I just go ahead and click on it and click on new once again. And then I have a white to purple gradient at this location. Now you can click OK at this point because you've saved your work, or you can create still more gradients if you like. So for example, I could double click on this first color right here and change it to a vivid shade of blue, let's say, and I'll go ahead and drag this circle over to this location here and click OK. And now I'll call this one something like blue, white, purple, if you will, and then I'll go ahead and click on new again. So you can create as many gradients as you like in one single session of this dialog box. After which point, I'll click OK. And now if I scroll down the list, I can see that I have 2 new gradients in the My Grads group. All right, so how do you go about applying your custom gradient? Well, if you selected a vector-based shape layer, such as this Dreamtime layer right here, then all you have to do is click on a gradient, and Photoshop will assign it as a fill. So notice it's not a layer effect. Our effects currently include stroke and drop shadow, which I created in advance. This is an actual gradient fill. Compare that to what happens if I select an editable text layer, like the word bonjour here, and I click on that same gradient. This time around, I'll assign it as a gradient overlay effect, and that's because text layers don't directly support gradients. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn that layer off, because otherwise things are going to get very messy very quickly. And I'll select the face layer so we can see what happens if I now click a gradient while that pixel-based layer is selected. Notice this time around, we end up with a gradient fill layer that is clipped inside of the face layer. So different kinds of layers are going to deliver different effects. Now, if I wanted to switch out that gradient with one of the others, then I would just scroll up to, let's say, greens, for example, and I would click. As long as that gradient fill layer is active, I can click on a different gradient in order to replace it. You can also drag and drop gradients if you prefer. And so I'll just go ahead and twirl greens closed, and let's try reds this time around. And I'll go ahead and drag and drop the gradient. Now, if I dropped it onto the face, then I would create yet another gradient fill layer that's clipped inside the face. But if I were to drop it onto the background, then I will create a gradient fill layer above that background. The reason it's not clipped is because this is a static background as opposed to an independent layer. All right, now if you figure you've got the swing of things, and you can go ahead and skip to the next movie, but there is still more. There are a bunch of keyboard tricks. And so to take advantage of them, I'll go ahead and scroll up my list here, and I'm going to collapse this Dreamtime layer just so that we're not seeing its effects. And I'll go ahead and grab a different gradient this time around. Let's go with blues this time, just for the sake of variety. If you want to create an unclipped gradient fill layer above this pixel-based layer right here, or a shape or text layer, then you want to Alt or Option drag a gradient and drop it, in this case, onto the contents of that fill layer. And notice we end up with an unclipped layer right here. That's not really what I want. So I'll just go ahead and press Control Z or Command Z on the Mac to get rid of that guy. And I'm going to get rid of this layer right here as well, just by pressing the backspace key. That would be the delete key on the Mac. What if instead what you want to do is you want to add a gradient fill layer effect to this pixel-based layer. Then you press the Control and Alt keys. That's going to be Command and Option on the Mac. And you drag and drop a gradient swatch like that. And notice that we don't have any interaction between this new gradient overlay effect right here. Again, that was a Control, Alt, or Command, Option, drag, and drop, even though this layer is set to the screen blend mode. And that's because what I need to do, just as I did in the previous movie, is double-click on an empty portion of this layer to bring up the layer style dialog box. Then I need to turn on that checkbox, Blend Interior Effects as Group. Now notice we get an interaction, a screen interaction between the gradient and that dark background, at which point I'll click OK to accept that change. Now I know you're thinking, gosh, Deke, those were a lot of keyboard tricks that I'm definitely going to remember, but I wish there was just one more. Well, here it is. I'll go ahead and twirl close this blues folder right here. Let's say you want to expand all of the folders inside the gradients panel at the same time, then you press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and click on any one of those little twirly triangles again. If you want to collapse all the folders, you Control or Command click on one of those twirly triangles again. So there you have it. So many keyboard tricks, so little time. And yet that wraps up my introduction to the new gradients panel here inside Photoshop 2020.